Good
Is my
evening,
audio okay,
everyone.
everybody?
You're good. Good evening,
Okay.
everyone, and welcome to another episode of Territories Talk, where we're here from the Virgin Islands, the beautiful islands of Bermuda and Montserrat, where my co-hosts that are here for another conversation to inform and unite our overseas territories family. If this is your first time tuning in, Territories Talk is heard here first and third Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 7:30 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. So depending on where you are in the Caribbean, you know where to find us when we go live. Otherwise, all our videos are always available on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page. We invite everyone to go ahead and like those. We're happy tonight to have with us some very distinguished honorables, and they will be talking to us tonight about our environment and climate change and looking at who's ahead of us as far as Caribbean region as well as the world. So I will turn it over to my co-host Shirley to say good night and hello.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hello. Hello to our guests. It's good to meet you, Honorable Roban, and nice to see you again, Quincia. It's really good to see you. Welcome to everybody around the islands.
All right.
Good to go.
And we share apologies from our other co-host, Mr. Christopher Famous. He won't be joining us tonight, but he's definitely tuned in and listening to all that is going on. So, Shirley, I guess we hand it over to our guests. Let's first start with guest introductions. Ladies first, Honorable Roman.
Well, good evening, and thank you for welcoming me to the Territories Talk. I tune in every now and again when I get the chance, and sometimes if I don't get to tune in, I see the different topics. I think this is an amazing show. We don't really have many avenues where the territories can have an opportunity to speak to each other and speak about our problems on a platform like this. And I really want to congratulate yourselves as hosts and co-hosts, as well as MP Famous for the work that he does to make this happen. But by way of introductions, I am the Honorable Quincia Gumbs-Marie, Minister of Sustainability, Innovation, and the Environment in the government of Anguilla. I would hope that all of my fellow OTs can find us on a map, but we are situated in the Caribbean, very close to BVI as well. So, you and I are some of the closest neighbors, and
Yeah.
also close to Montserrat. So we're kind of smack dab between the two. And, in terms of the work that I have done a lot to make climate change something that's very important in Anguilla, and try to raise the profile of what it means and explain to the average person what the consequences of climate change would be on their lives and livelihood. And a lot of the work that we do, it balances people, policies, the environment, and the economy.
Beautiful. Now we'll have the gentleman.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Happy to see my colleague, Minister Gumbs-Marie, again and be a part of the family of Territories Talk once again. I'm happy to be here with you. I am Minister Walter Roban. I'm the Deputy Premier of Bermuda. I am also the Minister of Home Affairs, and I'm responsible for the environment. I'm also responsible for policy around energy. I'm also the minister responsible for regulatory matters and oversee the regulatory framework for energy, telecommunications, subsea cables, and broadcasting, and a few other departments of the government, including Registry General, Land Title Registry, and land valuation. And I've also recently been given responsibility for CARICOM affairs and constitutional reform. And one of the main focuses that I'm dealing with, I am responsible for the government's climate and environmental policy and representing us on all those matters.
So,
Thank you.
Honorable, I have to ask, when do you get sleep?
I fight to make sure I get rest whenever I can.
I want to know
Okay.
what your project sheet looks like. How do you schedule your time?
I have a lot of good people who work with me and my family who try and crack the whip to make sure I get my rest and take care of myself. So
Okay.
unlike any other decent minister, I have a lot of people who help me. I don't do anything good alone, including taking care of myself.
Awesome.
So I have a lot of people helping me. I'm sure Minister Gumbs-Marie is in the same place. We don't do anything worthwhile without the help of our families and the people we work with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to have some strong teams. So we appreciate all the work that you guys do, because that is no easy task, and that's 4 years at a time in terms of the term. So that is a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so we're gonna get right into it. As persons are now aware, you're focused on one of the topics or areas that you basically eat, drink, sleep on is about protecting our natural environment. This is both the land as well as the sea, because as islands, we can't leave that part of it out. For some of us, especially here in the Virgin Islands, we're more sea mass than land mass. So we always have to be looking at, how do we do things in a sustainable way that protects our environment as well as is able to sustain our development. So for those who hear the word talk about climate change, what is climate change?
That's anybody's question?
Yeah, Honorable Gumbs, you can start us.
I mean, scientifically speaking, I think the widely accepted definition of climate change is a long-term change in the baseline of the Earth's climate. So it's not really, it doesn't really look at one small area. It looks at the Earth as a whole, and it identifies any major deviations from what might be scientifically considered as the baseline. But everything is in context, because I don't think that's really a true response. If you think about what climate change means for us in this time, in terms of the timeline that we're all living in, most people speak about the extreme rise in temperatures as a result of emissions and overconsumption, and what that is doing to the Earth's natural patterns, the currents, the consequences on animal species and the role they play in regulating the Earth, temperatures, fires, natural disasters, and such. And then to bring it even down closer to small island developing states, I think climate change to us means survivability in the countries that we are living in as we face the consequences of rising sea temperatures, rising sea levels, stronger storms, more frequent storms, extended periods of drought, extended periods of flood, extended hurricane periods. So I think historically we have been looking at September as our peak season, but we're now seeing instances where there's more frequent activity outside of what we consider to be our peak season. The consequences of ocean acidification and rising temperature on our fish stocks, and what that means for our livelihoods, and in the near future, in relatively 50 years or so, some of us have to be considering what will that mean for our low-lying areas and flat islands like Anguilla. I mean, the entire country is low-lying. And we're looking at what climate change really means for our ability to remain in the countries that we are in. And there are other countries across the world, other small island territories, or least developed countries that are considering how would they manage their populations, because they have accepted the fact that the Earth and the people who are its stewards are not changing their behaviors. And so it may mean that they may become climate refugees, and they are making real efforts to consider how can they move their entire populations out of the land masses that they currently occupy. So climate change can be very, it's very large, and it's also very singular. it also affects the individual. So very often when we speak about climate change, we speak about how a country's been affected, a region, or the world. But individuals, farmers have to consider climate change in the face of water scarcity, extended periods of drought, and the consequences on crops. Fishermen would have to, and fisher folk would have to consider the consequences of climate change on fish stocks, mating patterns, currents, and what that would mean for their livelihoods. So it is really all encompassing and very invasive. From a gender point of view, a lot of gender advocates are concerned about the consequences of climate change and the direct relationship it has with gender-based violence and abuse, the consequences on education. So, for example, if there's a major hurricane, students will not have access to schools because the schools may be destroyed. So it's very invasive, it's very all-encompassing, and it affects our daily lives beyond just government policy.
Okay.
Shaina,
Roban, what?
Can I just ask a question? I know Ruben can answer is part of his too. Mike, I wonder, do we in the Caribbean truly understand this, or what do you think is our real understanding, apart from the official definitions and so on? Do the people understand climate change? What do we understand climate change to be?
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you all. Minister Gumbs-Marie has certainly given a very comprehensive definition, and climate change does actually is about the long-term changes in patterns of weather and the behavior of the overall environment around us and what has happened over long periods of time. Some of us may see, like maybe last year, a certain period was wet, and maybe there's been maybe drier or even wetter period from last year, but that's not what climate change is. Climate change is the long-term patterns of weather and temperature, which we have been able to scientifically establish over a long period of time. Typically, this analysis has referred to the industrial age, i.e. since the 1800s, and the change in weather, change in temperature conditions, change in the overall environment since that time, and seeing that there have been a number of dramatic circumstances which seem to have emerged. One of them is the overall change in temperature and the shift in temperature since that pre-industrial period into the industrial period, and how that appears to have changed and the impacts that it's having on our overall environment. The proliferation of species and how many species over a long period of time seem to be impacted, and in some cases have gone extinct during this period of time. As Minister Gumbs-Marie talked about, the changes in patterns that have impacted agriculture in some parts of the world, where it appears as if certain crops that may have either been prolific during a certain period of time years ago are now either difficult to actually cultivate, or actually the weather patterns have changed where other crops now are able to be cultivated due to a clearly shift in weather patterns and in temperature as well. It's also about the accumulation of carbon in our environment, in our oceans, in our air, and in our overall environment, and the impact that that has, and CO2 emissions, which have come from the industrialization, how that is actually impacting and has dramatically impacted the environment that we live in. So it's not just about what we've seen from last year to this year, it's what has been the pattern over consecutive decades and even over centuries that we now see is dramatically different, and how the temperature rise and the overall change in the environment around us, the challenge to biodiversity from where it was perhaps even a generation ago. This is what climate change is, and what we've seen are the changes in patterns. We've always had hurricanes, but it's not that we have hurricanes, but it's the intensity and the frequency based on decades and decades of analysis. That is what identifies climate change. So it's not just what we see from last year, it's what we were experiencing a generation ago and what we're experiencing a century ago, and how that's different from where we are now. and how that is changing how we live in many ways. Those of us who live in the islands, in the temperate zone of the planet, whether it be us in the Caribbean or our family in the South Pacific, in Oceania, how their environment has changed, where sea level rise, as the minister identified earlier, has clearly changed the nature of the terrain, and in some cases, changed the land available for habitat and cultivation. Mm-hmm. These are the things that we are noticing, which have identified we are seeing dramatic changes in our climate and our environment, and the impacts that this is having. As to your question about us who live in the Caribbean, I do believe that our people are beginning to understand these impacts, because we are beginning to see how these impacts are influencing the economics and the impact on society. It is creating situations where whole economies are being impacted, particularly those of us who live in small island development states, where the intensity and frequency of storms are actually challenging the ability of our environments. And I believe that this is raising severe awareness amongst our people, because at least now they are able to hear answers as to why this is happening. And we're able to show them that this is a product of the change in our atmospheric, our sea and land terrain environments. We are seeing climate change happening right in front of us. Things as simple as the ability of species like bees to actually have sustainable existence in some of our environments, how that's changing, and how we find the environments are affecting species, not just humans, but also insects and other species in our environments, how their frequency in our environments has changed compared to 2-3 decades ago. So I do believe that people in the Caribbean in particular, and it's come perhaps because of the catastrophic impacts that we have in recent decades felt from hurricanes and other weather phenomena, that they are beginning to understand that there's something happening around us that has to do with our climate. I do believe that we must all continue the effort of education so that people can understand what's happening, because it's not necessarily a situation that we cannot adapt to, or we can do and take steps to manage within our own environments, because we don't have the control of what's happening in larger countries, but we can perhaps mitigate the impacts on our environments, and we can adapt in ways that we need to, so that we can have a more sustainable existence. But it's going to take everybody actually in our region having an understanding of what is happening around us.
Yeah. So let me ask you, how easy or difficult are you finding it to have people actually make the changes that would be necessary? And I'm talking about people in general, not government policy yet. There's a lot of work being done, and everybody's listening to, for example, Prime Minister Motley, who talks a lot about climate change and its effects and how it's going to be paid for and so on. How much of an effect is the education, the awareness process you're doing having on people's habits? Is it helping to change people's habits?
I think when it comes to awareness, it's very difficult to really get the average person to appreciate climate change in a meaningful way. No, people understand generally stronger storms, frequent storms. They experience the hotter days. They experience increase in sargassum and things like that. But sometimes the connection between this and climate change as a concept is not always there. I think we have to do a lot to bridge the gap and show how, like I said earlier, climate change is affecting the individual. Because when you think of climate change, really and truly, it's a silent killer. It doesn't happen where we exist, but we live in the consequences. So it's very hard to make people think about all the changes that they need to make in response to climate change, when in fact we are not overconsuming, we are not overproducing, our emissions are negligible. And it's happening in places, some of us, we can't call the name of the places it's happening. Some of us may never visit the places where it's happening, but the consequences are here. And then there's a level of helplessness, even from a policy level, where it is that no matter how much you prepare, you never really can be prepared enough to respond to climate change, because it is very unpredictable. We are living in a time that we haven't lived in before, and scientists are sounding the alarm, but sometimes it doesn't make sense until it's happening. Would the average person have really in Anguilla really been mindful of climate change if we didn't have Irma? The answer is probably no, because until you actually see and live the experience of such, sometimes it doesn't make sense. People telling you, you know, build better homes, or stop doing certain things. It doesn't make sense until you experience it. And then you start to ask yourself, well, if I change my behaviors, will my changed behaviors result in a change in the consequences that I am facing? And the answer is no. And that comes to the fore a lot when there's a clash between the climate and livelihoods. And I can give an example of, like, for example, fisheries, where it's difficult for me as a climate minister and the minister of fisheries to tell my fisher folk, let's just say, stop fishing on a whole because it's going to save us on climate change. Well, they're going to say, if the storm is going to kill us, we may as well eat and sell until the storm comes to kill us, because otherwise we would die because we don't have any means of livelihood. And I mean, that's a very extreme example of just stop fishing. But I mean, when we ask people to amend their ways, and those change behaviors that we're requesting of them is conflicting with their ability to earn, it becomes a very difficult spot to try in the middle of that to educate people on the consequences of climate change. And even as a minister, I have had to confront, I think, how would I call it? I think it's the bias in education based on the fact that the scientists are not from here. I've had to confront and battle that by saying, look, I won't take an emissions-focused approach to climate change because we are not emitters. I'm not going to adopt certain definitions because, like, say, for example, a conservation approach to climate change, because we have natural conservation habits, and the mere fact that we don't have many factories. So we are not over-consuming in a way that is large scale. Now, there are small spaces that we can go in and say, okay, change this behavior, amend this behavior, make these regulations, of course, but will it actually protect us from the consequences of climate change? No. It may help a shoreline somewhere here and there. It may help our local experience marginally, but I have completely said that in our definitions of climate change, we won't mention emissions. In our prioritization of climate, we won't prioritize conservation. It will be part of our climate response, but we have to kind of fight back and make it make sense to the international community on what climate change means to us, and in the same breath, educate our people on what the consequences of climate change are, because you're not going to feel those consequences every day. It will happen in some instances over time, and then other instances overnight. We would have been living our lives. We think to ourselves, we've experienced hurricanes, Irma is coming along, and no one expects to lose over 90% of your GDP in the course of 6 hours, and then have to try to build that up in the course of 2 years. And then you have a pandemic. And, you know, so it's very difficult really to educate people for something that they cannot actively prevent. We can try to do adaptive methods. We can do mitigation. We can do, and I'm not saying that we aren't educating. Of course we are, but there is a bit of a disparity between the cause and the effect in that education. And I'm speaking particularly when it comes to the urgency of climate change, because we can tell people about climate change, but I don't think that our education efforts have really underpinned the urgency that that we need, because there is a level of desperation. That urgency is underpinned by the fact that we don't have any money to respond to climate change in a meaningful way. We don't have a voice when it comes to our constitutional status in the global forum, and I'm sure we will get to that. And we cannot change and prevent and adapt and mitigate our way out of the consequences, because we are not the contributors of climate change. So the education is not. Sometimes when you hear about climate education, it sounds a lot like governments and other NGOs need to get into schools and get into communities and educate the average person about it. But there sometimes isn't an appreciation of all the moving parts, that no matter how much education efforts you would bring to the people, it's not that they don't want to know. It's just simply that their reality doesn't feel as connected to climate change as they probably realize it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is something where, again, we see that here in the Virgin Islands, because, similar to you guys, we had the terrible experience of Hurricane Irma and Maria in 2017, but it's almost as if after we clean up and pick up, we're back to business as usual. But we see in the news, protesters outside of the various climate conferences, COP26 and 27, and I think that there's one this month, as far as release. And I guess going to answer the question that someone raised, in terms of the representation on behalf of the islands, how is that global conversation coming as it relates to us getting the support that we need and that we do need and will need to respond to what is to come, so to speak? Roban, go ahead.
Yeah, that has clearly been one of the greatest challenges of what we've been facing, is just that, building the support and the awareness of the impact to the international community in particular on small island communities and coastal communities like the ones that we live in. It is apparent that the commitments that were made by certainly the larger industrial nations, and I happen to believe that much of the agreements, whether it be the Paris Agreement and other agreements such as the Convention on Biodiversity and the recent conventions that have been actually supported, although these are successes, they have been primarily to try and influence the behavior and conduct of the ones who are the actual polluters. Unfortunately, there hasn't been the greatest response to the obligations that have been set down in these agreements over the last decade or more, that was supposed to be responsive to what was happening on the global scale of climate change. And what we've seen is that those impacts, we in small islands and coastal communities who are on the front line are now beginning to experience those negative impacts. But those, as the minister said, who are the, if I can say, culprits of what we're doing, have been little, if at all, responsive to the crisis that we have seen and what was predicted would happen. And that is very difficult for us in the small island communities and coastal communities, because, as the minister said, there is nothing that we could do, even as a total group around the world, that will influence what is happening, that is contributing to this change of our environment. If all of us had renewable energy, if all of us eliminated single-use plastics, if all of us who had blue economy strategies with marine spatial plans that help to manage fisheries better, if all of us found ways to lower emissions, electrified transport, you name it, if we did all of that in every small island community in the world, it still would not influence in a major way what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the challenges that we face, is having the burden as small communities with the many challenges that we have, because we're all fiscally challenged, because there's money is not the pot of funds that we have to deal with to manage our own communities is not inexhaustible.
Mm-hmm.
But we are being asked, and the pressure is on us to do something about this circumstance. Even as I said already, those who are truly the polluters and the ones who are responsible for the CO2 emissions, for the accumulation of carbon in the ocean and in the air, are almost doing virtually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And the recent reports by the UNCC, the United Nations Committee on Climate Change, has said this, that the response to what we were told we needed to do to address the issues, to try and, as they said in COP26, the Conference of Parties, major global event that both myself and Minister Gumbs-Marie attended 2 years ago, virtually nothing has been done to meet the obligations that were said to had to be taken up by this time. We've had virtually no success as a country, as a planet in reaching those goals. So
as Anguillians, every aspect of our lives revolves around our ocean resources. The time is now to start building livelihoods whilst upholding environmental stewardship. I can tell you much about why we should preserve our ocean resources, but sustainability requires that we listen to the voices of the future.
Have you heard about the blue economy?
The what?
The blue economy.
What is that?
According to the World Bank, the blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs, while preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem.
What do all those big words mean?
They mean the ocean.
There's nothing that we can guarantee our people that they do that will change that. It is a difficult sell, but I still believe that we must continue the education. We must continue to build the awareness. We must try and work with our people to understand, and our children, because I believe that the children, particularly in our communities, are crucial partners and crucial to how we develop a wider global awareness and regional awareness. And we continue that effort, even as we cannot guarantee anything, because I believe that they may be the ones who can ultimately, with their peers around the world, move the dial ultimately around these issues. That may be unrealistic to think, but I am not content to give up in believing that we can do absolutely nothing, even as I cannot guarantee my own citizens that anything we do is going to change. I think we must all continue to put the pressure on where the pressure needs to be, so that globally we can be a part of a voice that wants to see these issues addressed.
Yeah. And that's very key. We're sorry about the interruption just now. We're going to take a quick acknowledgement of our media partners, and then we're going to play that video again so that everybody can get to hear it in its completion. So we want to say thank you to the Territory Talks media partners, Cayman Marl Road Facebook page, Radio TCI, Montserrat, ZJB Radio, Virgin Islands, CBN Radio FM 90.9 here in the British Virgin Islands and the US Virgin Islands. Bermuda's Channel 82, Radio Saba, PJFE FM 93.9, and Barbados' CBC Channel 8. Thank you for coming on board to help us to inform and unite our Caribbean family in all that we do. So I don't know, Honorable Gumbs-Marie, if you want to kind of like give out context for this video because it has something to do with Anguilla.
Yes. Thank you for that. So in keeping with the education question that you asked, this is a really good video to follow up. And it also, it's a good follow-up to what Minister Roban just said, that the youth, he believes the youth are the target group for our education efforts because it may be just through them that we see change behaviors. And a lot of our education efforts have been happening in the schools, and this is one of the examples of such. So this year we had our first Blue Week, which is focused on building. So the Blue stood for Building Livelihoods. The U was, oh dear.
It'll be in the video?
Yeah, so it was Blue. BLU stood for something, and now that I'm telling you what it stands for, I'm having a little break. But it was about ocean stewardship and the blue economy. So it's building livelihoods and understanding the environment or something like that. And we went around to different schools, and we got different students from early in primary school straight through to sixth form college, educated the blue economy was, and they opened our blue economy week with this video. So it's part of our initiatives.
Awesome. All right, so we'll take a look at some of it and then do some more discussion because we're already past our half-hour point. Time goes when we're having fun. All right.
As Anguillians, every aspect of our lives revolves around our ocean resources. The time is now to start building livelihoods whilst upholding environmental stewardship. I can tell you much about why we should preserve our ocean resources, but sustainability requires that we listen to the voices of the future.
Have you heard about the blue economy?
The what?
The blue economy.
What is that?
According to the World Bank, the blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs, while preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem.
What do all those big words mean?
They mean the ocean is important to our way of life. Many activities in and around the ocean create jobs for persons to support their families. These activities make our lives better and are part of what we call the blue economy. But we must be careful that they do not harm the ocean. Here are some examples.
Fishing. Every day, fishermen brave the open seas and bring back fresh catch, which is sold to the public.
Ocean transportation. Ships from across the world bring food, clothing, and other supplies to Anguilla, which we use in everyday life.
Local ferry boats and charter boats transport people to neighboring islands or take them on tours to our offshore keys.
Tourism. Our beautiful beaches and crystal clear water attract visitors to our shores. Many hotels, restaurants, and bars are located on the coast with beautiful ocean views. Recreational activities that are for profit are also part of the blue economy. These include scuba diving, kayaking, windsurfing, and sailing.
Of equal importance to the blue economics is that we maintain healthy oceans.
In the same way that we take care of our bodies to live long and productive lives, we have to take care of our ocean.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Minister Quincia, so this was something that was produced by your ministry, and it's part of a series of, you're saying, education that's happening.
Yeah, so during this Blue Week, we're gonna do it next year, I guess more closer in June, to align with Fisherman's Week, because we focus on fishing primarily in Blue Week last year. But we actually did it this year, January. One of the highlights is that we brought down, we invited many of our UK counterparts. So we had all of the teams that form the Blue Belt to come down and do a workshop. They also did a few series in the schools to speak about career opportunities in the blue economy. And we concluded it by joining the UK Blue Belt. So it was a lot of activities, a lot of different opportunities for networking locally and partnering between my ministry and different international counterparts. So we hope to have it bigger and better. And I know that TCI does something similar where they invite ministers down. I wasn't able to make the last one, but I'm hoping that next year we can do something similar where we can have an initiative that includes other OTs as well.
Okay. Yeah. Can I ask a question about money? We don't have money. We don't have money to protect ourselves, to make up for to protect ourselves from what's coming, or to repair what has been done. And we don't even have enough money really to prepare to make our voices loud enough, to lobby hard enough in these places that matter. So what's left to us? What are our options?
I'd like to speak to that for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
As I said earlier, I am not so willing to feel that some of the challenges that we face around these issues is so insurmountable that we cannot make progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the funding issues related to responding to climate are extremely challenging and in some cases can seem overwhelming. Because when one, and I'm sure Minister Quincia has had to go through this process, when you look at what your country may need to actually respond to the impacts that are being observed, mm-hmm. and the capital acquisition levels you need to actually make the investment in the critical infrastructure and to do some of the things that are necessary to reinforce your community against what could potentially happen, such as the sea level rise, which in itself, and I'm sure for a low-lying country like Anguilla, is perhaps a lot more perilous than it may be for Bermuda. You can almost be overwhelmed and feel that you're facing an impossible task. But one thing that I have observed over the last 2 years is that despite that, there are actually funding opportunities out there that if we effectively plan and put together the appropriate business cases around specific needs, that some of that funding can be made available to us. The reality is that the solutions that can support what many of our islands need to do from a global context, and I'm putting on the global context, is not actually that much money if you put it in a global context. When you think about the billions and trillions of dollars that are expended, particularly in the industrialized world around, wind projects and clean energy projects, or some of the interesting developments that we see are happening in an effort to decarbonize, particularly energy, or some of the other things that are being done. What will be needed to actually help us as small islands is much less than is compared to what needs to happen in the other large industrialized countries. When you think about the impact of transport, such as air transport, and what that contributes to the impacts on climate. What's needed to actually transform transport is going to be in the trillions. Or the efforts to replace coal-fired plants all over the industrialized world is going to take hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas our perhaps issues would actually are more perhaps achievable when you put it in a global context. I know these issues seem very insurmountable when we kind of look at it in the context of what our own countries are doing, and I totally get it that none of us have enough money to do everything that we need to do. It just, there is no country in the region that has it all. But I do think that there are strategies that we can deploy to access the capital over time that is needed to make steady changes. And there are private sector organizations, if you take it out of certainly the government's hands, because every government has limited revenue. But there are private sector and international organizations that are actually focused on these issues, that are prepared to give support and assistance to island communities and communities such as ours, to give us options that we can potentially, with the right planning, with the right execution and expertise, can potentially deploy to help our needs. I am not suggesting that this is not going to be a challenge, but there are avenues that are available. And I've certainly been in meetings in certain places where some of the largest institutions on the planet, banking and finance and areas such as large global insurers, are actually trying to themselves find out how they can actually free up capital that can address these needs.
Yeah.
But it's going to take effort by us as well to actually devise what we need and turn them into, I would say, bankable and realistic projects that can begin over time to address what we need to do as island communities. So I'm not prepared to feel that this is that insurmountable. Mm-hmm. I certainly remember when we went to COP26, there was one thing that I did recognize, and it still seems to be the trend. I'm not suggesting that it's the panacea, but there were more private institutions that were actually at that particular event who were actually bringing solutions to the table that can potentially help to finance some of the solutions that are required. I'm not suggesting that they're parking up at all of our doors, mm-hmm. but there are people in that particular sector who are looking for ways and looking for financial products and looking for ideas similar to what I would say certainly Prime Minister Mia Motley is doing with trying to find alternative solutions to the problems that we face, that we're looking for ways and different financial products that could help small island states deal with this issue. So again, I'm not suggesting that this is not going to be a challenge, but it's not necessarily a challenge with the proper attention and the proper expertise, if we can marshal them, that will actually, we can make progress for the solutions that we need. Because I'm not suggesting that we need to follow what the Europeans and the North Americans and others have said are the solutions. We need to work on solutions that work for us in the region, that are scalable to our needs, because it's not going to be the same type of wind farm that you see up in the North Atlantic that is going to help the energy solutions that the Caribbean needs. Our needs are maybe associated with the attributes that we have in geothermal, in hydro, and certainly wind and solar. But those projects need to be projects that are realistic for our jurisdictions, and even if it means some collaboration and cooperation and partnerships between different islands, rather than one island trying to marshal a solution on its own, but working with others. I happen to believe that partnerships are part of the key for us to develop either amongst ourselves or with other institutions that have our needs in mind to find pathways of solutions for ourselves. But I am a believer that there are solutions out there. These solutions should be tailored to the needs of our communities. And we have a responsibility to put together the appropriate business plans that make our our communities and the projects that we need like attractive to those who wish to invest.
Yeah.
As well.
Can I just weigh in on this very?
Hold your things. I want you to weigh in on this, but I want you also to. I was going to come to you. I'm wondering if we could specify, we could identify some things that specific that we could do that would make a difference. Because if things like the air quality is not an issue, I can tell you for Montserrat, for example, the general thinking is that we got so much trees that even if we had one car for everybody, Montserrat, we wouldn't contribute. It wouldn't make a difference, you know. We there's a lot of talk about geothermal, which is really expensive to do, but we are using diesel engines to drive electricity. But if the British people would, or the Americans would allow us to get cheap petrol from Venezuela, it would not be such a problem. So talk to us, Honorable Gums, but in responding, can you tell us some things that we could do that would really make a difference, that our people would be able to see? The things that work for them won't necessarily work for us. So what are the solutions that would, maintain our peace of mind, for a better term?
Well, I would have to start out by saying I'm definitely not disagreeing with, actually I should have begun earlier by saying I'm recovering from a flu and I'm a bit breathless because I'm congested, so I want to apologize in advance midway. But I'm not disagreeing with Minister Roban, but I am saying that our experience is completely different, and they may be as a consequence of our difference in constitutions, where we have different access to different opportunities. That may be where our experience is I may be looking at the glass half empty, and you may be looking at the glass that not half full, but in a more positive. It may be, but when it comes to funding for the region, and particularly for OTs, our response to climate change is extremely underfunded. When we look at our status as small island developing states, one of the things that underpin that join us together is that colonial past that would have already, in terms of just generally being able to have economic development, in infrastructural development, social development and such, was already handicapped from inception. And those experiences, a small economy, vulnerability to climate change, dependence on energy from outside sources, all of these elements come together to give us that special status as small island developing states. And then compounded by that is a newer phenomenon in the grand scheme of things, which is climate change. And then having to then add that to our responsibilities as countries, and then within the context of this conversation as governments. And when I hear about bankable projects, I hear it this way. You have created our problem, and now you are creating a business out of solving our problem. And I completely reject, while there's some economically valuable climate response initiatives, such as things like transitioning to renewable energy, where I see the value of having access to lower interest loans or better rates, I see value there. But broadly speaking, because we've already been historically disadvantaged, our primary response to climate change should not be rooted in bankable projects. And one of the things that I get so annoyed with when I hear the term is a lot of people don't appreciate how costly it is to mobilize the efforts to get a bankable project. So before you actually apply for the loan, being able to do the technical work. Part of our special status is that we ordinarily do not have all of the human resources on island to do that work. So now we have to outsource, pay for persons to look to complete the studies, bring persons, consultants in from all over the world. And the thing is, sometimes we have those solutions, but these banking entities require that you have these same studies done by some of the people that they fund. So now you have to just disregard the fact that your local scientist or your regional scientist would have come up with the whatever work that we need for a business case, and you have to go and get
somebody else,
consultants of a certain caliber with this kind of rating, and I mean, of course, you want to be able to have some kind of credibility to your business cases, but you do see that actually mobilizing a business case can cost millions in most cases. Millions that most smaller countries do not have access to. And then we have the regional funding mechanisms that do not consider overseas territories. And it is, I just recently completed my dissertation, and it was about transitioning from the periphery and a specific focus on the experience of overseas territories. And in this periphery that we exist in, we don't exist, basically. We don't have the benefit from the conversation. And the world treats us as if our climate experience is only as a consequence of the United Kingdom. We are not able at this point to say, actually, the storm that hit Anguilla was fueled by emissions from somewhere in central London, and therefore London is responsible. So this makes 100% sense why the United States can't assist in our funding, or Germany or some other country can assist in our funding. So we are now excluded. And to access grants, which is what we should be accessing, a lot in our grand scheme of responding to climate change, from the UK, grants is very difficult. We don't qualify for ODA. And when they fund our regional groups, they say don't fund the
territories.
And the regional groups are receiving funds from the EU, who is saying, well, the UK is no longer part of the EU, and our monies will not be going to any of the UK countries, which includes overseas territories. And now we have a systemic approach where the overseas territories are excluded from the global funding mechanisms. Now, while Minister Roban is correct that there are entities that we can get to, they are extremely limited because of our status. And again, I was pointing out constitutional differences. Perhaps Bermuda has access to a bit more, but in some of the international meetings, Bermuda had to extend an invitation just a few months ago, if you don't remember, you recall, Minister Roban, that the rest of the OTs didn't have access to. And we would have had to. It is a matter of we will not.
So, Minister, we are running. Yeah, we are running very close to the clock.
It is.
But go ahead, wrap up. Go ahead.
We cannot actively participate in a climate response until there's a global funding mechanism that is separated from global relations and global politics, and that. Least developed countries which don't have access to the mic, overseas territories, and other small island developing states have more of a level playing field in our climate change response. And yes, I accept there are instances where our climate responses must be bankable, but our overall climate response cannot be a business opportunity for a funding institution.
For them. And I think that's a good place where, guys, we are going to have to stick a pin. and bring you back after COP28. It is. Again, to further discuss, because I like the fact that at the end now we, started to bring out what's really happening on the ground in terms of the reality around policy and how we're going to actually be able to address this in a meaningful way. Because, we all got excited when Honorable Motley, raised the Caribbean voice and talked about, have to stay below a certain temperature to be able to survive this. So it's something that we really have to continue to beat the drum on, let persons know what's happening and how we need to continue to make those changes. We want to again acknowledge our media partners. Thank you to Cayman Marl Road Facebook page, Radio TCI, Montserrat ZJB Radio, Virgin Islands CBN Radio FM 90.9, which is all of Virgin Islands, US and the British. Bermuda's Channel 82, Radio Saba, PJFE FM 93.9, and Barbados is CBC Channel 8. So until next time, we want to thank everyone from tuning in across the region, including Florida tonight. I saw someone check in with a roll call, and we want to thank the minister for checking in all the way from London and joining us tonight. And until next time, thank you for tuning in to Territories Talk on behalf of my host. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.